Hi, everybody, and welcome into a brand new edition of the Ben Parris Show. It is Thursday, February 22nd, 2024, and we're going to hop right in this week because we have a very special guest coming on the program. Tom Costello is a senior correspondent at NBC News, where he covers aviation, transportation, NASA, and aerospace, along with some regulatory and consumer related issues as well. He gets to have one of the funnest beats at NBC with air and space, and was lucky enough to have a conversation with him this week about the latest happenings in air and space, what we could see coming up in the future, and more about Tom and his career as well. So excited to welcome a fellow Colorado native onto the show. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Very cool. So I guess I just like to start. Obviously, you're on the kind of aviation space beat, with some other things tied in as well at NBC. Everybody who really loves that kind of stuff has a story. I know we're both from Colorado, grew up near Centennial Airport. I don't know if that's necessarily how the interest started in you, but how did you get, excited about planes and space and stuff like that? Where did it kind of start for you?
I kind of fell into this beat, I'll tell you. I came to NBC News from CNBC back in 2004, so it's been a number of years. And at that time, a legendary aviation and space correspondent was retiring. And they asked me if I wanted his beat. And I said, "Are you kidding me? That is like the coolest beat at NBC News." I was really lucky. As it happens, listen, I think I grew up absolutely, enthralled with America's space program, with Apollo 11, Apollo 13, all of that, all of those missions to the moon and the Soyuz and Apollo dockings and the shuttle, all of that was something I loved. And then who doesn't love Star Trek and Star Wars and all of that, right? Um, so I'd always had an interest. And then I used to work at KUSA Television, 9 News in Denver, and I covered a couple of major aviation crashes while I was there. So I had a bit of a background in aviation and investigations when they asked me to take over the beat at NBC News. And very quickly, I was knee deep into some very serious accidents that happened, including the Miracle on the Hudson, for example. Um, I think it is a fascinating beats plural, because I do get to cover aviation, and everybody is interested in aviation, and to various degrees, right? If you're a soccer mom, you just want to know, how much am I going to pay to get my kids on spring break vacation this year? If you are a gearhead, you're going to be interested in the turbofans engines. If you are a techie, you want to know all about how cockpits are wired these days, or not wired, as the case may be. And then, of course, if you just love aviation, if you love flying, period, then you love the whole thing, top to bottom. So that's the cool part of the planes element. And then in space, the great thing about space is almost everybody is into it. Everybody is a space geek to some extent, regardless of political affiliation. And isn't that great? I get to cover something that doesn't have a lot of partisan divide to it.
It's not something you get to see a ton of, at least in the recent years. And you talk about how you were so interested with Apollo and how you saw space in media and on TV. And I've always kind of made an argument that there was a little bit of disconnect for kids my age, right? Born in the early 2000s, when the shuttle mission stopped, I was like 7. And then between then until 2020, nothing launched on American soil until DM2. So it seemed like there was a little bit of a disconnect, but it kind of seems like it's come back kind of in American culture, in the media, and then kind of popular culture. How have you kind of seen space come back? Obviously, commercialization has been a major part of that. SpaceX, Elon Musk, Bezos, Blue Origin, all these things have kind of led for there's a lot of interest in this stuff again after there might have been a little bit of a drop off in the 2010s.
Well, I think what happened is, when we retired the space shuttle, that was a conscious decision, first made by President George W. Bush, then continued on through President Obama. The decision was, listen, we've had 2 fatal shuttle accidents. We need to refocus beyond low Earth orbit. We need to get beyond low Earth orbit, which is all the shuttle could do, right? It could not go to the moon. And if we're going to do that, we need to reinvent ourselves. And so, yes, you're right. We did not put astronauts on an American rocket from American soil from the end of the shuttle program until they got onto that SpaceX rocket for the International Space Station. We still had a very heavy presence in space, but we were hitching a ride with the Russians. Thankfully, we don't have to rely on them anymore. And you're absolutely right that the revolution right now is in fact in the private space area. So it is Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin. And by the way, Bezos also playing a very big role on going to the moon. It is SpaceX and Elon Musk. And, he now, we know, if you read the papers over the last few days, has got the super secret deal as well with the Pentagon. And what? We don't know. You can imagine, but it has to do with, we think, the equivalent of Starlink and the satellite program, but on a defense scale. Separate from that, you've got the growth and the explosion in space tourism. So not just Bezos and jumping up into space on Blue Origin, but you've also got Richard Branson. So, there has been a tremendous amount of interest as this has come out of the government hands alone. It's no longer just in the hands of the government. It is also in the private sector. And NASA and the Pentagon need the private sector. They need Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And we can argue about whether that's healthy, that America is so dependent on one or two people, Elon Musk and Bezos, not just to get us to the space station, but ultimately to the moon and to Mars and in defense against our adversaries. But that's where we are right now. I mean, the private sector has proven it can do things very, very effectively and well and efficiently.
And it seems like, right, the general belief kind of across the board in anything has been that competition kind of drives innovations. And NASA, as a government entity, besides from other national space programs, never really had a ton of competition. Now that you have these people with, it seems like almost unlimited money, SpaceX wasn't always that way, but it seems like that they're almost kind of pushing NASA. You see what's happening with, we don't really know. There is a world where SpaceX could get to the moon before NASA, albeit not very likely, but who knows what's going to happen with that Artemis timeline and all sorts of stuff. It seems like that there is a race between commercial entities, but also at the same time between the US and say China.
Well, keep in mind, NASA had the deep pockets. NASA had the money, right? So you're right. Nobody was competing against NASA other than the Russians. But NASA had the money to pay for the engineering expertise, for the innovation, for the science and the brains of the operation, right? And NASA, make no mistake about it, NASA is footing the bill for us to go to the moon, right? They're the ones paying SpaceX. So it's still about government money, but turning to the private sector to do it faster and more efficiently. You and I are paying for this. There's no doubt about that, right? As for the moon, it's still going to be a NASA mission. I don't see a world in which a SpaceX crew lands on the moon without NASA. I mean, it's NASA's technology is going to be absolutely required to land on the moon. And then ultimately, if they decide to go on to Mars, the taxpayer is going to have to foot the bill. And so far, we as a country have decided we do want to go back to the moon, put a lunar base there, use it as a foothold to then go on to Mars. I think it's unlikely that we'll be landing humans on Mars before 2040. I just think that's unlikely. I think we'll probably have humans back on the moon maybe by the end of the decade, but that timeline is also sliding because of the challenges that they've been coming up against. And listen, we have another, as you suggested, the showdown with Russia right now is very serious. We did a documentary called Battlefield Space. It's available on YouTube, and we detail out the space race right now. And we're talking about the geostrategic space race and the fact that shots have already been fired in space. Shots have already been fired in space. It's been the Russians blowing up their own satellites and the Chinese doing the same as a show of force. But guess what? That's forced the space station to move. So it's not just about who can get to the moon the fastest. It's also about this militarization or at least a strategic imperative that we're seeing in space.
And it kind of seems like you talked about the space station. You mentioned it for a second. It kind of seems like it's gonna come to an end. We know that, and the hope is that this lunar gateway is kind of gonna be the next answer. How much do you think, how big of a change really, how significant is that the ISS, also kind of by the end of the decade is gonna cease to exist?
It will. NASA's plan is to deorbit the space station by the end of the decade. However, it will be replaced by a private company's alternative, and I think they call it doggone it, I forgot the name off the top of my head. It's like a space reef or something. I forgot what they call it. The idea is to create a floating business park and research park funded by Axiom, a private company. That is super cool. Super cool. The idea is private companies want to get up there and do biotech research in space, right? Developing cancer drugs or whatever. Universities want to be able to do their research in space. So now if you created a floating business park that can do all of that, in other words, companies and universities can pay for time at the business park that's floating, 220 miles above the earth. That's pretty cool. And I think that is, again, taking all of this to the private sector.
Space timelines are always a little weird. Are we ever going to see Tom Costello reporting from space? And would you do it?
I don't think it's going to happen. First of all, I don't think that SpaceX wants or needs me on one of their rockets, in part because I'm a journalist, right? And I think that I'm going to be looking for the good and the bad, and trying to report it as best I can. Second of all, I don't think NBC will sign off on me taking on that kind of a risky personal mission. NBC is so risk averse right now. It's not crazy about me being in a helicopter because of the potential risks. I'm not sure it's going to want me to go to the moon on a rocket.
We'll just have to see it. We'll move on, kind of to aviation, things back on Earth for a second. Obviously, I don't know if anybody knew what a door plug was probably 6 weeks ago. It's been the talk of everything, and Boeing with kind of just their quality control type of issues. How much time has that really taken up at the beginning of year 2024? And really, how big of a deal was that?
It was a very big deal, and it took up a good 3 weeks to a month of my time. It was the dominant story that I was on for NBC Nightly News, the Today Show, MSNBC, CNBC, NBC News Now. It's a huge deal. And the problem for Boeing is that while they may have figured out where this mistake happened in their manufacturing process, it speaks to a bigger issue about quality control, and a failure of quality control at Boeing. And they've had multiple problems, not just within the Boeing facility, but within their suppliers, including Spirit Aerosystems, which is the company that makes the fuselage for the Boeing 737 MAX. And by the way, they've had quality control problems not only on the MAX, but also, of course, on the MAX 8, because that's the plane that had two crashes overseas. And then separately, they've had quality control with their military tanker, and they've had quality control. They still have not gotten a Boeing spacecraft to the space station. That's astonishing. If you would have asked me 5, 7 years ago, who would I bet on to get to the space station first, Boeing or SpaceX? Boeing. Absolutely. Why? Because they went to the moon. Boeing was the key space contractor that really was behind our entire space program in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So to see them struggle with quality control issues to the extent that even they can't get to the space station yet, supposed to happen in the next few months, that really speaks to a problem, according to many experts, in culture that Boeing is experiencing right now. And Boeing recognizes that.
You fly a lot, I imagine. What does an average kind of year look like for you? Your frequent flyer miles, how many planes you're on, how many airports you're at, anything like that?
The only reason I know this is because the Today Show asked me at the end of 2023 how many airports had I been in 2023, and I think it's 23 U.S. airports and 11 or 15, I can't remember now, overseas airports. So yeah, quite a bit. I mean, listen, I generally fly somewhere every 10 days. I'm based on the East Coast. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And despite being from Colorado, so I try to get out to Colorado once or twice a year, a lot of my travel is on the East Coast, because if I'm covering a NASA launch, I'm just flying from Washington down to Florida for the space launch, right? I get out to California a couple times a year, and I get out to Seattle a couple times a year usually. I don't get to Arizona enough, but when I'm there, I love it. And I did spend a summer as a kid. I spent a summer in Tucson, so I love Arizona. And Phoenix, what a great city. And ASU, what a great school. that you've got there.
Yeah, Sky Harbor is America's friendliest airport. I always try to do an airport ranking on the show every once in a while. And every time I go to a new airport, I always try to give it, some type of review. My favorite one that I've found so far is SFO. I think it's beautiful. All of their security upgraded, very easy. What do you think is maybe the most underrated airport in America, and what's been your
Ah.
favorite throughout kind of all of your travels?
Well, I love SFO. You're right. I got to tell you, if you've ever flown into LaGuardia at New York, you may be thinking, "Oh my God, that's a cesspool." They have done the most unbelievable overhaul and upgrade that you've ever seen. And I would now tell you that the terminal, American Airlines terminal at LaGuardia, is beautiful. It's phenomenal. But that's a big airport, right? I mean, it's a very busy airport. Uh, I like Reagan Airport in Washington for one reason. It is easy in, easy out, and it's a very close drive to the Capitol building. It's literally across the river. So, in terms of convenience, Reagan Airport is fantastic. It's also, by the way, here's trivia for you. It has the busiest single runway in America. You may think, well, how is that possible? It's not as big of an airport as whatever, as Phoenix, as Denver, as LA. Yes, but we're talking about one runway. The busiest single runway in America is Reagan Airport in Washington, D.C., because they have one runway to handle the planes that are that big. And then I would tell you there are a couple of smaller airports I like. I just think that they're cool and they're well managed. Tampa is a cool airport. Raleigh Durham is a cool airport. San Jose is a cool airport. There are a lot of cool airports. I'm not going to give you the airports that I think are an embarrassment to the country, but I'm sure everybody, when you fly, you see them firsthand.
DIA does all right as well. It does all right.
DIA, Denver International, is, as you know, it's undergoing a major overhaul, and it looks like that's just going to continue. I just read something in the Denver Post about, they got to now readdress the baggage system again and the train system again, and yeah. I was there, by the way, for the grand opening of Denver International Airport 30 years ago. That tells you how old I am. But it's, to me, it doesn't seem like it's that old of an airport, but it's 30 years already.
We kind of started. You talked about some of the bigger things you've seen. I know you were in New York for CNBC on 9/11. You saw the miracle. You reported on the miracle of the Hudson. What kind of do you think will go down aside from those as some of the biggest moments in your career?
Well, I was in New York on 9/11. That's a very personal experience for me for a number of reasons. But anyway, yeah, so I was there for that day. I am from Littleton, Colorado, and I grew up on South Columbine Way. So while I did not go to Columbine High School, that incident resonates and still does with anybody who is from that part of Colorado. The Columbine shooting, of course. Unfortunately, I've covered too many mass murders. I don't even want to recount them all, but they're horrific. I'd rather talk about the positives. I mean, I had a phenomenal experience about 18 months ago when Captain Kirk, when William Shatner got onto the Jeff Bezos rocket and bounced into space for about 15 or 20 minutes. I mean, really, that's all it was, right? You bounce up there. Um, anyway, the night before, the launch had been delayed by a couple of days because of heavy winds in East Texas. And this is a desolate desert. There's nothing out there for hundreds of miles. I get a call in the afternoon from Jeff Bezos people saying, "Hey, Jeff is going to have a little get together on his ranch. Would you like to be there?" I'm way the heck over in El Paso because that's like the closest bigger city. And I said, "Yeah, sure. When?" "Oh, you got to be here in 90 minutes." Oh, crap. I'm at least 120 miles away. So I drove like a bat out of hell and to mix the metaphors. And thank God there were no state troopers on I-10 in East Texas. But I got there just as they were opening up the gates to Jeff Bezos ranch, and we go up to his astronaut village at the Bezos ranch just the night before this launch, right? And they have a saloon. It looks like it's from the Wild West days. You walk into a saloon. So I walked in, but inside it's beautiful, right? It's all top quality. And Jeff Bezos is standing to my right. And all of my colleagues from ABC, CBS, CNN, they go over to Jeff Bezos. Well, I've met him before. In fact, I just met him a couple of weeks prior to that. And he's an interesting guy to talk to. But to my left is William Shatner standing all by himself, nursing a beer at the bar. And I thought, I'm going to Captain Kirk, right? So I walk over, introduce myself, and he was fascinating. The guy is 90 plus years old at the time. Now he's whatever, 92, sharp as a tack, funny, passionate about space, passionate about the environment. You know, he's Canadian, passionate about Canadian politics. So it was and he was so nice, kind, nice. I had him for 20, 25 minutes to myself. And I was asking him about, a particular Star Trek episode I remembered. He didn't remember the episode because for him, it was just an acting job, right? Okay, whatever. I did that scene, move on, next. For me, it resonated with me. So it was kind of funny that, stuff that sticks with you as a viewer to the actor, they're like, okay, cut, next. They move on and they don't really remember the scene. But anyway, that's kind of one of the highlights, one of the many highlights I've had over the course of the past, many decades of doing this job.
That sounds like just an absolute blast. I know as well. Obviously, a lot of what you do is reactionary reporting on when something happens, but then we also get a story like here's the day in the life of a plane. Here's what's going on at the ATC training center that I think just a few weeks or maybe a couple months back. But um, how much of that is you, kind of finding a story and pitching it and say this might be I think this is really interesting.
Yeah.
How can we do something like that?
Absolutely. Listen, I mean, you're right. News is going to be reactive. We have to react to news of the day. But in the meantime, on this beat, if I can pull back the curtain and show the audience something maybe they don't get to see every day, that's something I enjoy doing. So whether it is, in fact, getting behind the scenes with SpaceX, or if it is with William Shatner, or as you mentioned, we were at the Air Traffic Control Academy in Oklahoma City a few weeks ago, showing what it takes to become an air traffic controller, to go through the academy, what kind of credentials you need. Or, I was with the CEO of Alaska Airlines. We were the first news organization that he took me on board the plane and showed me the door plug and showed me exactly the problem with this thing that blew out of the side of a plane. So those are moments that I think are really afford us, because we are afforded these opportunities that nobody else gets. I can share them with you, right? And you, the viewer, and help deepen your understanding of an issue and pull back the curtain a little bit. So that usually it's either my producer and I, we've been a team together for 20 years. Um, it's usually the two of us brainstorming on, we had to try this, we had to try that. Maybe so and so would let us see this or that. Sometimes it is the airline or it's one of the space companies calling us up because they've seen our work, they like our work, and they trust us and they say, hey, would you like to come and see XYZ? And we say, yes, we'll be there right away. And then we've got to convince the Today Show or NBC Nightly News to pay for it. But, those opportunities, I think it's why I signed up for this job so many years ago, because I wanted somebody else to pay me to see the world. And I wanted to do it on somebody else's credit card. And it's worked out pretty well, really.
I mean, I think that's what a lot of people, especially in journalism, I love travel. I think that's what a lot of people I really hope for. I guess kind of already asked just the overarching biggest things of your career going forward, respectively, kind of on the back end. Where do you think, as you kind of as things will wrap up, and I don't know how long you're gonna still be at NBC, but where do you think things are kind of going in the future of both aviation and aerospace that, me and you will still be able to see?
Well, listen, I do think, as we discussed, it'll be an exciting period for the private sector going into space. There's no doubt about that. That'll be fascinating. They're going to drive the agenda. I think that the geostrategic play between Russia and America is really about what's happening right now. It's a very serious, potentially, a potential battlefield that we're seeing in low Earth orbit. Separate from that, the American space race with China is also very real. America wants to get to the moon by the end of the decade. China wants to also be there by the end of the decade with a human presence. They've already got a robotic base on the moon. The Chinese want to have humans on the moon, and the same place we want to put them, on the South Pole, because that's where you find water ice, and we need water ice to sustain, of course, humans, but also to use as rocket fuel to go to Mars. So those are going to be some really fascinating themes to watch for over the coming few years. And so I think from an aviation and space perspective, that's going to be high on agenda. Listen, as for me personally, I'm always looking for, peeling, as I said, pulling back the curtain on something. And then if I can do that overseas, all the better. My wife is European. I've lived overseas. My kids are have dual nationality, so I spend a lot of time in Europe, and I love being able to do, take the viewer someplace they haven't been. A year ago, we were with the Norwegian Navy on a NATO assignment searching for Russian subs in the North Sea, and we found one. So, those opportunities are really, really fascinating and an eye-opening opportunity as well.
Last one for you. You've had to cover a lot of different things, some on your beat, some off. I know you had to do some things on January 6th, the protest in 2020. It's kind of just that everything else is a sign that we all kind of get as reporters. What is the biggest advice that you could give to the future reporters that, yeah, I might want to cover a specific beat, but we got to be flexible as well?
Well, that's absolutely true. But listen, I don't think I think it's going to be very important, and I tell young, aspiring journalists this all the time. The world doesn't need your opinion. You haven't asked my opinion, Ben, on politics, and I'm not going to tell you my opinion. It doesn't matter what I think. As soon as I give you my opinion, I taint everything else that I'm trying to provide to you in terms of information, objective information, including all sides if I can. And that's the challenge we face, right? To wake up every single morning and be committed to hearing out all sides and searching the truth and not tainting the reporting one way or the other. I think it's a greater it's a greater intellectual challenge to wake up every morning committed to hearing all sides, giving everybody the benefit of the doubt, and searching for truth and providing objective information. That's why I got into this business back, 30 something years ago when I first started. And I still think that the country needs that. The country needs to know that there are sources of information, of journalism that are reliable and not partisan. And it's up to you and to me to wake up every morning committed to that as much as you might be committed to anything else in your life. And for me, it's almost a religion, to be honest with you. I feel that it's such an important role in the democracy that we have to provide that. So I would tell aspiring young journalists, thread the needle, thread the needle every single day. Wake up, be committed to truth, be committed to objectivity, and do your damnedest to keep an open mind. And if you do that, then hopefully you can be successful. And then the last thing I would tell you is whether you are writing for digital, in other words, .com, or you are telling television news stories or radio or podcasts or whatever, the secret to success in all of these platforms is writing, 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 writing. If you're a good writer, you can have a real good career. If you're not such a good writer, great looks won't carry you that far on television. So it's a combination of journalistic skill and writing that will hopefully carry you through.
That's great. Tom, thank you so much for the time. Means a lot, and happy we could have you on.
All right. All my best to you guys. I'm sorry it's going to be such a rough day there in Phoenix at 80 degrees. Awful.
So once again, I want to thank Tom Costello so much for taking some time out of his busy schedule. He had just hopped off the Today Show before talking with me when that was recorded a little bit earlier this week. But it was great to talk to him about the latest things that are going on. Obviously, the situation with Boeing and the Alaska Airlines flight with the door plugs right at the beginning of the year, and what's going to happen, how we're going to get to the moon and Mars and beyond. And it was great to hear that piece at the end. Some great advice for future journalists like myself. So one more thank you to Tom Costello. Hope you enjoyed the conversation and this edition of the Ben Parris Show. Hope everybody's doing well. We'll see you again next week.